Welcome, everybody. It feels really weird to be up here talking on a microphone. Um, Before I begin and introduce our seminar speaker for the day, Professor Baer is going to go around with a microphone to see if there are any announcements.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Is that on? Okay. We're having an impromptu event on this Saturday, the 29th, 7 a.m. We're going to do a little bird walk. So if you're interested in birding in town, we do have binoculars. So we'll bring some of those along. If you let me know you need some, I'll definitely be sure to get them. We're going to meet in front of the mess deck, 7 a.m. Doesn't look like it's going to be rainy. So you can reach out to Patrick if you're curious, or to me, or yeah, we'd love to have some folks join us. So,
do we have any other announcements? Great. I will make one announcement. If you have a question at the end, I'm going to ask that you wait for the microphone. Our speaker is currently stationed in Italy, and she cannot hear you unless it's in the microphone. Same is true for anybody online. So we'll let Dr. Cleveland do introductions, and then we'll save questions till the end.
Okay, so here we go. I feel an incredible sense of joy at introducing our seminar speaker today. Our speaker is Lieutenant Trish Dunford. She is a 2016 graduate in marine biology from MMA. When Trish was here, she was a member of the NROTC unit, and she commissioned in the Navy right after graduation. Also, while Trish was here, she was a campus leader in many, many ways. She was a student athlete. She played both soccer and lacrosse. So those of you who have who are scholar athletes might have some questions for her about that. As I said, when she graduated, she commissioned right into the U.S. Navy. She was there for a little while and then completed flight school with the Navy, and she flew anti-submarine aircraft, actually using acoustics and oceanography to find submarines. So that's a pretty cool application of her degree. Currently, while she's full-time with the Navy, she's attending Hood College, where she's working on a master's in environmental biology. Trish is also looking at an inter-service transfer in the coming months, where she's going to transfer from the U.S. Navy over to an officer in the NOAA Corps, where she's going to be, and this is the really cool part, flying the Hurricane Hunters aircraft for NOAA. With no further ado, please let's welcome Trish.
Hi, thank you so much, Professor Cleveland. That was a great introduction. I'd like to start off by saying thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be invited back to speak with you all about my career up until this point and what's on the horizon. Again, Lieutenant Trish Dunford, call sign Ducky. I'm a naval flight officer in the Navy out in Naples, Italy. So it's a little bit later here for me than it is for you guys. And I work at the European and African headquarters, or 6th Fleet. So I'm going to term everything today in the critical phases of flight. So going through my agenda, I'll take you through mission planning, then we'll taxi out and talk about the scientific method. We're going to take off, talk about some details of flight training, cruise, descent, and landing of where I'm headed to land. When I was invited to speak, I was deeply honored, but at a loss for what project or study I could present today. After all, I'm an aviator in the Navy, but not a scientist. I watched all the seminars from the last 2 years and came to the conclusion that I'm going to present nothing like you've seen before. Perhaps a little more relatable to some people, I came to Maine Maritime to be a marine biologist. You know, train dolphins. I'm sure almost everyone here can relate, but by the end of my time here, I was pretty much just training algae. So I had a Department of Transportation grant studying the excretion of glycerol in response to environmental stressors on a green algae species. I studied at the University of Hawaii on fish foraging theory and aquaculture design, reef health, and collected box jellyfish for the University of Hawaii Cubozoan Venom Research Laboratory. I completed rescue diver courses through MMA and studied marine ecology while getting my AAUS scientific diver in Bonaire at a research station. I flew in every Navy aircraft imaginable on summer cruises and learned how to navigate a destroyer. I interned at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, Maryland as an aquarist and dive intern, conducted field studies with NOAA and National Marine Fisheries shark tagging in the Delaware Bay. I interned in a protein engineering laboratory at the National Cancer Institute in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and that's just to name a few. I loved Maine, and I loved all of the Ocean Studies Department had to offer. We'd take boats out to collect starfish, and by night, I was playing soccer, lacrosse, and ultimate frisbee with my friends. I pictured myself as a field scientist when I came here. But when I graduated and commissioned from MMA ROTC in 2016, I hoped to become a surface warfare officer on a naval ship with an intention of working for the Marine Mammal Program or in meteorology and oceanography for the Navy. As is the case with many other people, the Navy and universe held a different plan for me. Instead, they sent me 40,000 feet above the ocean, Naval Flight School in Pensacola, Florida, to be a naval flight officer. Or some of you may know that position better as Goose in Top Gun. So the Navy trained me to be Goose, this guy, a backseater. But I couldn't let go of being a scientist, and I really struggled with that. But after some reflection, I realized that being an NFO on a plane is no different than being a scientist on a research vessel. The same scientific method that I learned and practiced here was the same one that I needed to master if I was going to be successful in the Navy. Because while there are no dolphins or algae in the sky, at least not that I've seen, there are observations, questions, hypotheses, experiments, analysis, and conclusions. And they all happen dozens of times in a flight. Armed with that perspective, I saw the plane as a research vessel, 10,000 feet above anywhere I thought I would ever be. And this shift in perspective changed everything. As I applied the scientific process to flying planes and conducting missions, that's where the mission planning phase comes into play. As with any good flight plan or mission plan, we prepare for the unexpected. And what could possibly be further from the expected than flying a variety of aircraft to track submarines? Submarines. I know it sounds insane, but I promise I'll explain. But becoming an aviator isn't the moral of the story, nor is it the end. Now I'll fly you through the scientific process as I choose to apply it to the phases of my career so far. So I'll start with the observation. This is just a map of the areas that we look at of the water in Europe and where Russian submarines tend to hang out. The top one is the one that I selected to take a look at today for our observation. And our giant submarine graphic is where they usually come out of from their maintenance phases. So today we'll say for our observation that intelligence suggests a Russian submarine is underway in the north, in this red circle here. But that's all we know. Considering worst and best case scenarios, the submarine could have traveled hundreds of nautical miles away from its home port. And that's where the red circle is. That leaves our question to be, where and how far did the submarine go? And how do we find it? So here I've highlighted the area in the Norwegian Sea as the most likely location for the submarine to be hiding, based on time, speed, distance calculations from home port. To address how do we find it, our other question, we must address the main method to track submarines, and that would be by the sound they transmit in the ocean or the frequency. Therefore, we have to understand how sound moves and thus begin our background research. So for our background research, we'll talk about our primary sensor or tool for finding metal objects in the great big blue. It's a sonobuoy hydrophone launched from the aircraft. The sonobuoys can passively monitor for frequencies in the ocean. We know that three major factors influence sound in the ocean: temperature, salinity, and pressure. Temperature and pressure are the foremost factors we'll look at today, as they're the ones that we can measure the best from the aircraft. When sound is emitted from a source, whether it be a ship, submarine, whale, or krill, it'll decrease speed as depth increases up to a certain point, as you can see here with the red arrow. That point is what we refer to as a sonic layer depth, or for these purposes, the layer. We'll just refer to it as a layer. We also factor in the mixed layer, thermocline, and deep water, which I know you all know very well. And based on what body of water we are looking at in the world, that will change. The layer is the depth of maximum sound velocity for the most part, ignoring deep ocean sound. The layer is most important because any sound trapped above or below it will remain on that side of it. In this case, you can kind of think of the layer as a shower curtain, holding sound above or below it. It's a pretty big deal when we're trying to listen to things in the ocean. That shower curtain can be anywhere from 50 feet to 1,500 feet, if it even exists. We identify the layer so that we can place our sensor on the side of the layer most of the sound will be. The sound will propagate from the source. Let's say the source is a sperm whale, in a number of different ways, as shown here, with our sound propagation paths. We won't get too into the weeds, but there's a number of different propagation paths, all influenced by environmental factors, which we'll talk a little bit about. Okay, so more on mission planning. In the Navy, we use the Fleet Oceanographic and Acoustic Reference Manual, or the RP-33, to study applied oceanography. I know a lot of the oceanography I'm going to talk about today is not the scientific oceanography you're used to, but this is what we use to do quick math in the plane. In fighting a land battle, strategy and tactics are based on geography. In the underwater realm, it's the same, but with oceanography and bathymetry. We operate on understanding that the speed of sound moves differently. During diurnal heating and cooling, summer months versus winter months, it has a more severe variation from the equator to the Arctic, as shown here. We know that the bathymetry and bottom type of the ocean has a really great impact on sound. Deep trenches allow a large amount of room for a metal object to hide, or a submarine. And a sandy ocean bottom absorbs sound and makes it very difficult to hear a metal object rather than a rocky bottom, which would propagate sound. We utilize a modified Wentz curve to identify areas of high ambient noise from shipping traffic, similar to one that I think you've seen before. We use the Douglas sea state scale to assess sea state of an area and indicate whether or not our sonobuoys will drift or break. Again, the sonobuoys are a sensor, so pretty big deal. Ocean fronts and eddies play a large role in sound movement as well. We think of them as soldiers hiding in trenches on land, as submarines hiding in the center of warm eddies, and submarines hiding in the edge of cold core eddies due to the temperature variation from the layer depth, the layer we talked about before, so trapping sound. These eddies can last for months to years, which allows us to plan for those complex ocean environments ahead of time. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention weather. We track weather as it applies to safety of flight, but also in terms of ice movements and rain, just to name a few. Both are very loud and noisy frequencies in the ocean. So with this significant background research, we formulate a hypothesis. Our hypothesis will be, in this case, if the sound moves as we predict it to, then the submarine can be located in this general area. Let's just say here, right between this aircraft carrier and P8. Thus, we build our search area. So hypothetically, it'll be right where the arrow is. Anti-submarine warfare, commonly referred to as ASW, will be our laboratory practice today. It's broken down into 4 phases. I'll talk you through all 4. First, we search our area of hypothesis for other than organic sound, or metal. This step is a little bit like searching for a needle in a haystack, so it's pretty insane to narrow it down. We then test with an experiment. By dropping sonobuoys in various geometric patterns to capitalize on sound propagation that we previously predicted, we'll take a look on where we think it might be. Now we observe, and here you see an aircraft dropping sonobuoys into the ocean under the localized graphic. In our experiment, we may observe frequencies from the sonobuoys on our systems, and if we see what we call a frequency of interest, we'll localize on it, meaning conduct more finite tests to ensure it's a metal submarine, not maybe a whale, and that does happen all the time. If we deem that frequency to be a logical one of a submarine, we begin to track it, our 3rd phase. Now tracking, that's a finding worth noting. If the tracking phase shows submarine-like characteristics, we will theoretically move to the attack phase and be prepared to launch a Mark 54 torpedo on the contact if ever considered necessary. This is a picture of a P8 weapons bay that's open with 2 torpedoes in it. It's got 5 weapon loading stations. We also carry harpoons, search and rescue kits for humanitarian efforts, and mines, which you might have heard about in the news more recently. Here's a diagram of all the sensors we utilize to find submarines in the ocean from a more cooperative standpoint. Ships with various towed arrays, which we talk about in classes, fixed underwater sensors, helicopters and large planes with highly sensitive radar and sonar buoys all work together to track submarines. With all those ships, submarines, planes, and sensors, we also add in the interoperability of working with NATO partners and allied nations to achieve a final goal. All these formal Navy words are just a way to say we conducted an all-encompassing analysis of our findings with all of our nations in Europe that are interested. And did we find the submarine? If not, where did we go wrong? And how can we improve our process? Areas we are concerned with include the Norwegian Sea, the Black Sea, and the Baltic Seas, as highlighted here in red, and finally the Mediterranean. And that's based on the locations of our adversary assets as well as our high-value units in the Navy. A high-value unit example would be like a carrier. So now that we've completed our analysis, we can summarize and make our conclusion. The observation being that the intelligence in the question is the presence of a pesky metal tube hurling towards the sea. The background research included the historical observation and data, weather and environmental picture. The hypothesis, if sound moves as we predict, then the submarine can be located in this general area. We test it with an experiment. We search, localize, and track, hopefully not attack, the contact to the best of our ability. We analyze the experimental data. Did we track a submarine? Did we find it? Why didn't we? We report conclusions, internal self-assessment, and share data with intelligence agencies and partner services like NATO to be coupled and collated into a giant database. The submarine tactics are now my scientific process, and the plane, my laboratory. So I've talked a decent bit about how I use a scientific method as an aviator, but what I haven't talked about was how the Navy teaches this aviation-specific scientific method to officers. Well, it starts in sunny Mobile, Alabama, the gateway to the Gulf. I've never heard it called that, but Google tells me that's what the motto is. Almost immediately after getting here, I was flying solo in a Cessna variant Piper Cherokee after only 13 hours with an instructor. Pretty terrifying. I moved from my student pilot's license to academics such as aerodynamics, which felt like a foreign language to me, but navigation, meteorology, and engineering were a breeze, as they were not far off from the classes I took here at MMA. But as each phase of flight school came, it felt like I was leveling up in a Mario Kart game, and more flying turtles were hurling towards me. I dodged them, but some admittedly, I was slower than the other dodges. Following some academics and civilian flight time, it was time to head to the T-6 Texan, the center picture here. It's a single-engine, two-seat ejection advanced training aircraft, capable of up to 7 to 8 G-forces, aerobatics, and the best whale watching you could ever imagine. Flying was fun. But then it was time for me to set cruise control in the plane and head to the P-3 Orion in Jacksonville, Florida, followed by my time with VP-46 in Whidbey Island, Washington. I did everything I didn't learn in flight school. Everything I prepared for went out the window. I flew missions for the global war on terror in Saudi Arabia, Djibouti, Africa, and Bahrain, all in the Middle East. I flew humanitarian efforts in Yemen. We shot through the Straits of Hormuz in this war pig, the P-3 you see pictured here in front of the mountain. An aircraft older than anyone flying in it, by a lot. Eventually our time had come and the squadron was ready to transition to the P-8 Poseidon, so we were switching aircrafts because the P-3 is being put to rest. Back in Florida, I went to learn the P-8 Poseidon. It's Gucci, shiny, also a beast. So that brings us to our descent phase. The P-8 offered new challenges, but also more opportunity. Opportunity to put the scientific method to the test, tracking countless submarines across San Diego, Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, Iceland, Italy, and South America. After all this time in the P-8, I saw fit to return to the P-3, and this time it wasn't the Navy that was telling me to do so. It was something that had happened to me right here at MMA, right where all of you are sitting. Same exact auditorium, and I'm sure it hasn't changed very much. I came to this seminar about 10 years ago and listened to Lieutenant Carl Rhodes, now Commander Carl Rhodes, speak from the NO Corps, also an MMA graduate. So it really did it for me. I never forgot that talk. I kept his contact information and maintained communication throughout the years. And as soon as I saw an opening to follow him into the NO Corps, I took it. I applied to the job that I thought I did not hold the qualifications for. With little hard science skills on my resume in the past 7 years, I shot for the atmosphere and beyond. And I guess all the practice and jobs I thought myself to be underqualified for did me well. In a few months, I'll be moving forward with an inter-service transfer to fly for the NO Corps Hurricane Hunters in Lakeland, Florida, like Professor Cleveland said. Now, it's a really incredible job from what I'm told, but I haven't done it yet, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you about it. I would rather show you. So I'm just going to switch my screen so we can watch a video of it. Bear with me.
Storm, we need to fly through the hurricane's eye wall, the most violent part.
Okay, so we got what, 12 miles to the wall here? We have 3 minutes. 3 minutes?
Once we're at altitude, we strap everything down and get ready to punch into the storm.
Oh, we're about to go in. Secure all equipment. This one looks strong.
No matter how many times you do this, you always get a knot in your stomach just before you fly into the hurricane wall.
Okay, folks, seatbelt light is on. Here we go. Rock and roll. Okay. Nice sharp wall. This ought to be good. Okay, wind speed. And got about 25-degree correction. Okay, airspeed 230. Okay, here we go. Okay, steady. Good one. For your gather. All right. Good one.
After being tossed around by 120-mile-an-hour winds, the moment you break in the eye is just incredible. It's just so peaceful.
My center, no 43. We'd like to do a 180-degree turn.
I think it's a new eye wall for me.
An eye this perfectly shaped is a real thing of beauty, but it also means Emily is definitely strengthening.
Look at that sea state down there, David.
Our instruments tell us how fast the winds are circulating around the eye.
It's been windy over here for a while.
The Hurricane Center can't determine where the storm is headed until we've pinpointed Emily's center.
This looks like a great eye sounding.
Getting good data today. Hey, you, number 25 is ready to be launched. Okay, let me know.
Roger, we'll be ready in 3 minutes.
Okay, I think we should be back up. All right, so back on our landing phase of flying the Hurricane Hunter for NO Corps. I'm just going to read an excerpt from one of their flights. So, slicing through the eye wall of a hurricane, buffeted by howling winds, blinding rain, and violent updrafts prior to entering the relative calm of the storm's eye, NOAA's 2 Lockheed WP-3 Delta Orions the Hurricane Hunter variant of the plane I previously flew. 4-engine turbopropped aircraft, affectionately nicknamed Kermit and Miss Piggy, true warhog, probe every wind and pressure change over the course of an 8 to 10-hour mission. Scientists aboard the aircraft deploy GPS and sonobuoys as NOAA Corps officers pilot and navigate the P3 through the hurricane. Those instruments continuously transmit measurements of pressure, humidity, temperature, and wind direction and speed as they fall towards the sea, providing a detailed look at the structure of the storm and its intensity. Measuring the over-ocean wind speed and rain rate in hurricanes and tropical storms, key indicators of potentially deadly storm surges. In addition to conducting research to help scientists better understand hurricanes and other kinds of tropical cyclones, NOAA's P3s participate in storm reconnaissance missions when tasked to do so by the NOAA National Weather Service's National Hurricane Center. The P3s also participate in a wide variety of national and international meteorological and oceanographic research programs. Recently, these aircraft have been used in major studies on storms approaching the continents of Europe and North America to improve forecasts and study the effects of El Nino, atmospheric gases, and aerosols over the North Atlantic, large-scale convective storm complexes in the Midwest, and winter storms battering the U.S. Pacific coastal states. So to me, that sounds like a lot of science, something that I never thought I would get back to after my life took a little pivot after graduating in maritime. But I found a way to incorporate science into everything that I've done, whether it be perspective or applied oceanography. I've made it work for me, and I'm coming back to what I initially set out to do, fly for the NOAA Corps. I didn't think I was going to fly for the NOAA Corps. I thought I would be on a vessel, but this is just as good, if not better, for me. So, like any hurricane, my presentation has run out of wind. I'm extremely honored and grateful to be given the opportunity to talk to all of you. Please feel free to reach out to me using this contact information here. I will help you in any way I can. And while I can't promise anything, you, like me, might be surprised on where it might take you. I'd like to thank Dr. Baer for inviting me to speak, my mentors, Professor Cleveland and Commander Coxon from my NRTC unit for providing steadfast advice over the years since I'm May. Dr. Brennan for his assistance with my NOAA Corps transition, as well as all of those that I've studied or flown with over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoops, am I on? Hello? Yes? Oh, okay. It's weird. I don't hear myself. Thanks, Trish. That was awesome. So Professor Baer has the mic. And so those of you who have questions, if you could raise your hand and wait till he gets to you with a microphone, because Trish won't be able to hear you unless you're on the mic. And then you can go ahead and ask her some questions.
Hi. I was wondering about your acoustics equipment, and so when you guys take the readings using your hydrophone, do you guys account for air travel that is going through, or do you guys take the readings when it initially hits the water?
We do account for air travel. That goes into our ambient noise calculation. We have like baseline frequencies for that. And on a certain frequency on what's called an acoustic gram that comes up on our screen. So we can pick that frequency of interest and then look at the frequency within like 1 hertz.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Here you go. Hey, Trish, this is Verdi. 2 questions. First of all, who's the puppy with since you're in Italy?
Ever asked me. She's enjoying her life at the beach in Delaware with my parents.
And the second question is, those sauna buoys that you throw out of the plane, how many of them do you deploy in a given mission? And how much do they cost a piece?
That's the good stuff. So we can carry 129 sonar buoys for just a mission. We can monitor up to 64 at a time. We have about 67 different types of sonar buoys, active and passive. The active sonar buoys are very expensive. The passive are kind of expensive, but any buoy pattern that we drop could be anywhere from a car to a really, really nice car.
Does the sonar that you use, does it affect, or do you know if it affects the echolocation used by mammals?
The sonar that we use on the sonar buoys, depending on the buoy, does affect mammals. So before dropping a pattern, we do something called mammal mitigation. We'll drop one of our passive sonar buoys or 53 Foxtrot in that area, and we'll monitor for 15 to 30 minutes for any mammal traffic. And the second that we hear mammal traffic, we'll restart the timer and continue that until we're clear, what we consider clear of mammal traffic.
Hi, this is a little less scientific, but what do you think has been your favorite thing that you've done so far?
That's a really great question. I would have to say actually doing anti-submarine warfare off the coast of Hawaii for the first time. After studying it for so many years, I had never put it into practice because I went to the Middle East. So actually doing what I had trained to do felt really, really good. So yeah, I would say that that's my favorite.
How do you guys, how do the sonar buoys communicate back to you guys, and how do you stop other people from picking up that information? Because other institutes like URI and Woods Hole have similar equipment, but I'm assuming you wouldn't want their equipment to pick up the signals that your equipment is giving off. So how do you guys avoid that?
A really astute question. We use RF channels, so just 1 through 99 to assign to each buoy, which is why we're limited to how many we can monitor at one time. It's part of the reason. So we'll have like RF channel 2, and that'll be one sonar buoy, and that's how we communicate with it is via our VHF antenna on the aircraft. We have one on the underside and one on the upper side, so that when we yank and bank and turn, we're able to receive the data, whether it's on the top or bottom of the aircraft. And yes, other air, surface traffic, radio towers can pick up the information if they're in range, because VHF is limited to line of sight. So we do have certain restrictions when certain ships or planes are around us on what buoys we can and cannot use, or if we can use buoys at all. And then it's a great point that you have about URI's systems, because like NOAACOR, for instance, uses the same exact bathyothermographic buoy that we use. So there's really no difference.
Thanks for a great talk. So you mentioned a book or a resource that lays out the Navy applied oceanography. Is that accessible to the public, or is that just something that the Navy can access? So I'm just curious about what's in there.
You can actually Google it as a free PDF. If you put in RP33 like comma US Navy or something like that, it should come up. I would say it has some good information, but a lot of it is fairly outdated. And we use it for applied oceanography, understanding that a lot of it is not the most accurate information we could be using. But because we have to compile so much stuff together, we use ballpark numbers and ballpark principles. Does that answer your question?
Hi, Trish. Sorry, Sarah O'Malley here. Um, what do- what do you do with the submarine when you find it?
In our pocket and take it with us. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you just like track it, or just like identify there it is, and then you know where it is, and that's it? Like, I mean,
So it's really complex because it depends on what we think it's doing. You know, is it friendly? Is it not friendly? Where is it? How close to our own units is it? How close to our country is it? But what we usually want to do is have a last known position. And when we have that last known position, it gives us a smaller AOU for the next time that we go out to track it. So if we don't have what we call continuous coverage, meaning one aircraft relieving another aircraft, constantly maintaining contact on the submarine, we want to keep a small AOU. And so the next aircraft that comes out has a better probability of locating it based on the size of the AOU.
Hi. I was wondering if these are these buoys like redeployable? Can you go out, get them, pick them back up and reuse them, or are they single use, they just stay out in the ocean? Or can they be maintained and stay in their position and continue to be used?
A great question as well. So the sonar buoys do have, depending on the sea state, depending on the weather, a lot of drift that's incorporated in where they go. But they have a lot of settings that we can adjust. We can adjust the depth, their lifetime. So 4 hours versus 8 hours. And that's dependent on if they're active or passive, meaning are they emitting sonar? And the more sonar they emit, the shorter their life is. So let's say we have sonar buoys that have an 8 hour life. That's enough for 2 different aircraft mission sets. So one aircraft can go out and drop the buoys, monitor them for 4 hours. Another aircraft will relieve that aircraft and monitor those buoys for the next 4 hours. So they could maybe get 2 uses out of them, but most unfortunately, they are single use. We don't retrieve them and we don't reuse them. We use a new one every time.
Trish, I have a question. And you might not know this for the hurricane hunters yet, but I would imagine when you're dropping a sonobuoy from the sky to go into the ocean, particularly if you're in the eye of a hurricane, where does it go? I mean, can that get? I just imagine somebody like swinging a ball on a string and then letting go of it, and you don't know where it goes. How do you keep track of them?
We have really smart systems that a lot of the buoys now have GPS on them. So they have the location that we can see on our system and the aircraft and our screens. So we can maintain the track, the drift rate, and then we can also triangulate how much we think that they'll fall as opposed to where we want them to go based on the speed that we're flying and the altitude. So oftentimes we fly at 10,000 feet to drop initial sonar buoys, but when we want to get to that finite phase that I talked about tracking or localizing, we come down to 200 feet and kind of yank and bank right on top of the water. Our engines are like a little allergic to salt water, but we ignore that. And we drop the sonar buoys so that we get a much more finite position for where we want them.
Cool. Anybody else? Okay, so I have one last question before we let you go. You were a student here at MMA in marine biology. You went through senior research. As you can imagine, our juniors are coming up on a hard deadline this week for that. We also have a lot of scholar athletes here in the audience. What can you tell them? Like encourage them and give a few words of advice as kind of your parting question.
Okay. So I'll start with senior research. Senior research, and I'm not joking, you guys, is one of the most valuable experiences you're ever going to have. No one else is going to teach you how to do that kind of research and how to put your thoughts together in that way. No one else is going to edit your documents the way that they do at Maine Maritime. I promise you. Take advantage of those edits. Take advantage of those outlines. Be serious when you're writing it and take a step back. Look at the perspective of what you're writing and don't get stuck in the weeds. Think about, does this make sense? Does it matter? Who will it matter to? And then write to those people. So really take advantage of those opportunities that Maine Maritime gives you for senior research, and then the presentation skills. If you're not able to brief in science, it's like what you're studying doesn't matter. So the best thing you can do is become a better presenter, a better public speaker, so that the things that you're studying that really do matter are conveyed to the people you're trying to convey them to. So I'd say that for senior research. For student athletes, scholar athletes, good for you, number one. It's not easy, but it's absolutely worth it. The leadership and the teamwork that I learned while being on teams at Maine Maritime is invaluable to me. I use it for metaphors every single day when I'm talking about ASW and teaching it. I use it every day when I communicate with my coworkers. I put myself in their shoes. I can understand how to talk to them much better because of the things I learned while playing sports. So I would say, make sure you make all your labs as you can with sports, but also take advantage of those sports teams and the men and women that you're playing with. It's really something special, and you'll never have that opportunity again in your life. So take advantage of it. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right, well, let's have a round of applause for Trish. I don't know if you can hear this, but everybody's clapping for you. Well, folks, that's the last semester or last seminar for the semester. So well done, and hopefully we'll see you all at dinner tonight in pajamas.